what actually happens when the most influential politician in the US Senate suddenly finds himself cornered in a situation he helped create? Chuck Schumer, for decades, believed he had complete control over the flow of news, public perception, and the political narrative that shaped the opinions of the masses. He saw himself as the conductor behind every headline, every story, reaching screens and newspapers. But suddenly, that sense of control began to crumble. The move he intended to weaken Donald Trump ended up exposing a critical vulnerability in his own party, a weakness spreading quickly among Democrats before anyone could contain it. By the end of this story, it will be clear that Schumer's real nightmare wasn't Trump himself, but the risk of losing something far more fundamental: the perception of power and authority he had spent decades building in Washington. Power in the Capitol isn't just about votes, titles, or committees. It's about controlling the narrative. For decades, Schumer knew exactly how to shape perception. He created stories, released them through friendly media outlets, and watched as the public accepted them as truth. It was a system that worked like clockwork. When the government shutdown began, Schumer felt confident. He had what he thought was his master move: pressure the Republicans, paint them as obstructionists, and watch public opinion turn against them. The idea was clear: make the Republicans look indifferent to the public's suffering and position Trump as the villain. Controlling the story should have been easy. And, in theory, it should have worked. Political history showed that the party holding firm during a shutdown usually pays the political price. Schumer expected the Republicans to break. Some would defect, others would seek a deal, Trump would face internal criticism, and everything would collapse in a matter of days or a couple of weeks. But reality played out differently. The Republicans stayed united and firm, defying every prediction. Even more concerning for the Democrats, they started communicating a simple and effective message. They were asking for a clean spending bill, no add-ons, no hidden agendas, just what was necessary to keep the government running. Meanwhile, the Democrats were demanding trillions in additional spending on programs that had little or nothing to do with running the government, covering specific interest groups and priorities that could wait. Side by side, who looked more reasonable, who seemed to be acting logically? Now, imagine trying to manage your own household budget. You need to pay the electricity, rent, put food on the table, and someone comes and says, before you pay your essential bills, you need to buy a new boat, renovate your neighbor's house, and fund a project 3 towns away. Ridiculous, right? That's basically what the Democrats were proposing during the shutdown. The impact showed in the polls. Independents, who usually split the blame between both parties, started putting more responsibility on the Democrats. Working-class voters, and even some traditional liberal voters, began to question why essential services were being held hostage for unrelated demands. The narrative Schumer carefully built started to unravel. While he was trying to control the damage, Trump acted decisively, but in a completely different way. He wasn't trying to win news cycles. He was solving real problems. A critical example: during the shutdown, the military wasn't getting paid. Thousands of young men and women in active service, some overseas, faced uncertainty about their next paycheck. Trump redirected available funds to make sure they continued being paid. No grand announcements, no press conferences, just effective action. The Democrats, on the other hand, questioned the legality of this decision. Some even suggested it was unconstitutional to pay the military during a shutdown, an argument that sounded completely out of touch to the public. The contrast was clear. Trump acted, the Democrats debated. The symbolism was powerful. While Schumer talked about bureaucracy and parliamentary rules, Trump ensured military families were protected. The media, traditionally favorable to the Democrats, began to break the pattern. Headlines and segments presented facts more evenly, questioning the logic of tying government operations to non-essential spending. On social media, videos of Schumer and other Democrats refusing to approve essential payments went viral. Memes and clips directly compared Trump's action with Democratic inaction. The narrative slipped out of the Senate's control. Internally, the Democratic Party was also fragmenting. The progressive wing questioned the leadership's strategy, seeking bolder action instead of gradual concessions. Names like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez emerged as potential alternative leaders. The old guard was disconnected, both from younger party members and from working class or independent voters. Approval numbers told the story. While Trump's popularity rose, Democratic numbers fell to historically low levels. Voters traditionally loyal to the party, including Latino and younger voters, began drifting to Republicans, challenging old political models. The coalition that had sustained decades of Democratic victories was breaking apart. This situation highlighted something crucial. Institutional power matters only as long as people trust institutions. With public trust at historic lows, controlling the Senate or shaping media loses much of its impact. The ground was shifting beneath Schumer's feet. His traditional tactics, once effective, no longer worked. And even allies and donors started distancing themselves to protect their interests. What was unfolding was far more than a shutdown or a political battle. It was a structural and cultural shift, a realignment of American politics. Voters wanted authenticity, tangible results, and leadership that solved real problems, not empty rhetoric. Trump capitalized on this, while Schumer remained trapped in the old rules. Democrats would need to reinvent themselves, admit mistakes, challenge orthodoxies, and allow new leaders to reconnect with voters and regain relevance. For Republicans, the challenge was different, turning electoral success into lasting institutional change and maintaining the energy of the movement while exercising power. We are witnessing not just a political battle, but a social, cultural, and ideological turning point. A realignment that may only happen once or twice a generation, shaping decades to come. Schumer unknowingly accelerated this process. In trying to strengthen his position, he exposed vulnerabilities in his own party and revealed historic strategic flaws. This episode shows that power has changed. It's no longer just institutions and committees that control, but perception, concrete action, and connection to the real concerns of the people. The era in which leaders could dictate narratives without consequence is over. Politics is renewing, reconfiguring, and making space for new voices and movements that reflect the realities of the population. We are at the beginning of a historic realignment. How it unfolds remains unknown, but it's clear that old coalitions, fragmented messages, and disconnected leaders are being challenged like never before. The shutdown was only a catalyst, a clear demonstration that the American political system is changing, and that power now depends more on action, authenticity, and results than on titles or institutional control. This isn't just about one party or one president, it's about the evolution of how Americans relate to leadership itself. Citizens are increasingly skeptical of traditional authority, and they measure leadership by tangible outcomes rather than carefully crafted narratives. The rules of engagement in politics are no longer dictated by what happens behind closed doors in Washington. They're dictated by what voters see, feel, and experience in their daily lives. The implications extend beyond immediate elections. Long-term political strategies, once based on institutional influence and media relationships, must now account for real-time public perception and direct accountability. Leaders who fail to adapt risk irrelevance, no matter their seniority or titles. Schumer's experience during the shutdown is a cautionary tale. Even decades of political mastery cannot insulate against shifts in public expectation. Meanwhile, the Republican approach during this period highlighted a new model of governance. By focusing on problem solving and communicating in simple, direct terms, they reinforced the notion that effective leadership is measured by outcomes, not press releases. This dynamic appeals to voters frustrated with partisan gamesmanship, creating a feedback loop where decisive action becomes more valued than political maneuvering. The generational factor also cannot be ignored. Younger voters, increasingly influential in elections, are less interested in abstract policy debates or party loyalty. They prioritize tangible results, accountability, and leadership that aligns with their values. For Democrats, failing to recognize this shift risks alienating the next generation of voters, a cohort that could determine political dominance for decades. For Republicans, it represents an opportunity to redefine their coalition and consolidate long-term influence. Another important point is how technology amplifies these changes. Social media, viral videos, and real-time news coverage shorten the time leaders have to respond. Mistakes and miscalculations are magnified instantly, and public sentiment can shift dramatically in hours, not weeks. This rapid feedback loop further diminishes the effectiveness of traditional narrative control, a tool Schumer once wielded with precision. In this context, leadership is no longer about maintaining the status quo or managing perception from the inside. It's about agility, clarity, and responsiveness. Those who understand and adapt to this environment can build influence even outside traditional institutions. Those who cling to old methods risk being sidelined. The political ecosystem is evolving from a hierarchy of power to a network of trust, results, and perceived competence. Ultimately, what Schumer faced during the shutdown is a microcosm of broader societal changes. Trust in institutions, whether political, media, or corporate, is waning. Citizens demand more than rhetoric. They demand results that affect their everyday lives. Leaders who fail to recognize this shift will lose relevance, while those who embrace it can redefine their role in society. The shutdown was a catalyst, a moment that illuminated the realignment of power, perception, and leadership. It demonstrated how quickly fortunes can change when public expectations outpace traditional strategies. It also showed that in the modern political landscape, decisive action, authenticity, and connection to tangible outcomes outweigh control over narratives or institutional prestige. Looking forward, this realignment is likely to influence policy priorities, electoral strategies, and the way political campaigns are run. Parties will need to invest not just in messaging, but in credibility, results, and responsiveness. Leaders will be measured less by speeches and committee votes and more by whether they can deliver meaningful solutions. History will remember this period not as a mere shutdown, but as a turning point, a moment when old political norms collided with evolving public expectations. Schumer's miscalculation exposed systemic vulnerabilities in his party, revealing that influence is no longer a product of seniority alone. It is earned through action, consistency, and the ability to meet the real needs of the electorate. We are witnessing a transformation in American politics that could set the tone for decades to come. The rules have changed, and anyone who refuses to adapt will find themselves left behind. Power is no longer guaranteed by position or media control. It is earned in real time by solving real problems and by demonstrating leadership that resonates with the people. The lessons from this episode are clear. The perception of control is fragile, trust is invaluable, and results matter more than rhetoric. Those who internalize this shift will shape the future. Those who do not risk irrelevance. Schumer's story during the shutdown is a vivid illustration of this new reality, a reality where leadership is measured by impact, authenticity, and the ability to respond effectively to the evolving expectations of the American people. The question now is not who controls the narrative, but who can deliver outcomes that matter, who can act decisively, and who can maintain credibility in an environment where public trust is fleeting and attention is scarce. This is the era of outcome-driven leadership, and it will define the next chapter of American politics.